We're going to get started. Let's see who else has popped in since Carol, Daniel. Oh, great. We got Joan, Tamara. We got most of the alphabet represented already. Okay, awesome. We're getting started. Hello, welcome to A Blacklist Education. This is going to be a creative conversation and Q&A with my mother, Jane S. Smith, who is the author of this beautiful book that Zoom is probably going to make weird. Author of A Blacklist Education, American History, A Family Mystery, and A Teacher Under Fire. So this is probably my chance to put in the chat. I better put the buy links right now. So you can go look at what that cover looks like on Bookshop, or below it, I've got my mom's website, and you can see a number of ways to get the book there if you're interested. I am so lucky to have gotten an early copy of the book, and I holed up with it last weekend. I read it in like a day. It's such a fast read. It's inspiring, it's infuriating, it's fascinating. It's truly a page-turning history, mystery, memoir mix. And it's so scarily relevant to what's happening in our schools and so many other institutions across the country today. And Mom, you're such an amazing storyteller and writer and thinker. I couldn't be prouder to share this time together. And I won't just hog you to myself. Welcome, everyone. This is going to be a very interactive evening. For starters, love to get a sense of the room. In the chat, if you could, love to just hear your name, where you're dialing in from, and one thing you'd love to learn or leave with tonight. So I'll put those little prompts in the chat myself. Your name, where you're calling in from today, and one thing you'd love to learn or leave with. People said, wow, are you worried about doing a Zoom with your mom? I don't know. And I said, I've literally been preparing for this since the day I was born. We've been doing an event together all my life. So it's hard to do things without you, right? So anyway, name, yes, Joni.
Hey, Joni. I'm not going to greet everybody in person.
Michelle, Tamara.
Third question is hard, so let me think a minute. Okay.
Yeah, you think a minute. Nicole, Andrea. Yeah, how to stand up to blacklisting and support blacklisted people. How to have confidence as a teacher in today's climates. More about teachers' unions. We got Sahava from Moss Beach. Hear from a few more. Love to just hear where you're calling in from, and one thing you'd love to learn or leave with. So we get that too.
Is my mic on?
I hear a mic.
Hi.
And just put that in the chat if you would, if that's possible.
Don't know how to do that.
Well,
Hi, this is Joan Horn. I'm Jane's cousin, and I am fascinated to hear what she's going to say about my uncle, who I loved.
Okay, fantastic. We got Elsa and Jeff. We got David. We got Bonnie, Daniel, Daniel, yeah, from China. Great to learn about how to write drafts. So writing too, get the chops, how to write drafts and edit them. Great, great question.
Hard.
Yeah. Well, what'd you say, Mom?
That's the secret. It's hard.
Hard. Okay. If it's hard, you're doing it right. Awesome. Well, keep those coming. I'm going to go look at this, as we go along. It's great to just know who's in the room and help kind of populate our questions. And we're gonna get into this. We can do this, right, Mom? Can we do this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Jane/Mom some questions for about 20-ish minutes. And then we'll open it up to you and all your questions. So you'll have more time to kind of gather what matters most to you. And of course, you'll be more informed because you'll have more material from the book. And then we'll tighten things up again a little before the hour to gather takeaways together before we end. So I'm going to ask away. Is that okay, Mom?
Please. That's why we're here.
Great. So, a blacklist education opens with a discovery. Your mother has just died decades after your father's passing. You're cleaning house and you discover an accordion folder crammed in a dusty cabinet. What is in that folder?
First, I want to say that if I were writing fiction, I would never do something so obvious. But this is fact. And I found this folder and much, 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 much other junk that I was in the process of jettisoning. And old, no longer relevant maps, expired travel brochures, Christmas cards from several decades before, just tubs of stuff. And I came upon this file and I discovered what was going to be probably the presiding emotion of this entire project with, wait, what? What's that about?
Mhm.
Total surprise. In this folder, I found a number of photographs, newspaper clippings, and letters from people I had not known my father was corresponding with. For example, Eleanor Roosevelt, Laurence Olivier, D.W. Griffith,
Mhm.
the superintendent of school. I just,
Mhm.
what on earth is happening here? And none of these had any explanations. To those of you who know my father, I think the most surprising thing I found was a little card that announced that he had been a Boy Scout leader. This was a man who suffered from hay fever and seasickness and had no interest in sports of any kind or in team spirit or group activities of the kind that I associate with Boy Scouts. So all of this was a total mystery to me. So there it is. And I decided, well, this should not go in the dumpster. I'll save this and think about it. And then, uh, really quite accidentally, not too long afterward, I was sitting at home reading the New York Times, drinking my coffee. I'm sure we've all had this experience. And I start reading this article about Irving Adler, who some of you may recall as the inventor of the new math, which was this extremely popular and also extremely unpopular program for teaching math to elementary school students in the 60s mostly. And 70s. Anyway, Irving Adler, it was a big profile of Irving Adler, and a lot of it was about how he had gotten into writing textbooks because he had been a blacklisted teacher in Straub-Muller Textile Vocational High School in New York City. And when he was considered too dangerous to do that, to expose students to his math teaching, he was fired. I won't go into all the details, but then he went into writing math books. So in this article, they mentioned an archive where records of these blacklistings were held. And I knew that my father had also been a high school teacher in a vocational high school in New York City and had always said he was forced out of his job. But when all of this happened, I was about 4 going on 5 years old. And for lots of obvious reasons, I was not part of the discussion. So I didn't really know what was going on. So on a whim, because this is what people like me do, I found the address for this archivist in the New York City Municipal Archives, and I wrote a letter and said, so I understand there are other people. Did you ever hear of Saul Schur, my father? And to my total amazement, I got back this response saying, oh, yeah, would you like a copy of his file?
Yeah. And, so you get this file from the New York City Municipal Archives, and it turns out to be a redacted transcript of a very bizarre interrogation. I'm just going to quote the sentence or the two or three sentences from the book. People codenamed Falcon and Sugar said my father was a communist or had been a communist or had been associated with people who were or had been communists. How did they know? No evidence seemed necessary for these vague assertions, which, as I discovered, often cited groups that did not exist in any other record. But these silly names and made-up groups have very real consequences. What were those consequences for your father?
Well, I'll go back a little bit and say that I discovered it was easy for me to get a family record, but extremely difficult to find out about other people. And we can talk about that later, but it wasn't just sailing in and finding out all about this entire process by any means. And one of the restrictions on these records was I was not allowed to name anybody in the archives except a personal relative or somebody who had explicitly granted me permission to use their name, which is very hard because almost everybody was dead. It's really hard getting permission. So anyway, what I discovered was that in the 1950s, the New York City Board of Education and other school systems around the country, but New York was the largest school system in the country, and as far as I can tell, the most zealous in its pursuit, had a special office run by not an educator, but a lawyer he's always identified as New York City Corporate Counsel, who would gather from God knows where lists of names of people he decided to bring in for interrogation. And you had to go to his office, which was the first thing that struck me, and the image that lingers, is that it was as though he was hiding out in some Batman villain hideout. It was a abandoned school, a school building that had once been offices, but was now used as a storage place for broken furniture. And you had to go up to the fifth floor through an antique elevator and go through a labyrinth of offices and get to this room where there was a two-way mirror where you could be observed from the outside. There was a stenographer and some kind of primitive recording device. I'm not sure if it was a wire recorder or tape recorder or what the technology was at the time. You were interrogated by a lawyer, but you were not allowed to bring a lawyer. And basically the only question on hand was, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Which some of you may recognize as the constant refrain of the House Un-American Activities Committee and the Senate committees chaired by Senator Joseph McCarthy, whose name has become the umbrella term for this entire era. You couldn't know what you were accused of. You couldn't know who was accusing you. And if you said no, it was assumed that you were lying because all communists lie. And if you said yes, of course, then you would lose your job. So it was truly a Kafkaesque situation. And the only way that you could keep your job was to turn in somebody else, to prove your loyalty by naming someone else, naming other people. So as you can imagine, people were very scared, and the temptation to name more and more and more people was rife. So where were these accusations coming from? What was the reality basis? I have no idea. But many, many people, hundreds of people, thousands of people were questioned, hundreds of people either were fired, put on a kind of more public trial and then fired. or pressured into early retirement or resignation.
I want to go back. And then we're going to catch up with that. One of the ironies of this story is, Saul exemplifies so much of what's often celebrated about America. He's the child of immigrants. He's a star student. He's an Army veteran. He's a husband, a parent, a Cub Scout leader. He's a PTA stalwart who gets letters of commendation from Eleanor Roosevelt. And most of all, he's a teacher. He spends almost 20 years teaching high school English in what you clearly document is an extremely underpaid, overcrowded conditions. Like, when I say extremely, I mean like Life magazine ran an entire issue about them, for example, right?
Well, that was actually about my school, not about where he
Yeah.
was teaching.
So that was, yeah, okay. Nevertheless, he was extremely underpaid, extremely overcrowded conditions, right? Because this is coincident.
And also teaching English in a vocational high school where it was all boys and they were being trained basically to be auto mechanics. That was the principal education, and electricians. So literature was not their main interest, let's say.
Yeah.
I think they were not just overcrowded, but hostile conditions.
Okay. But this is what he chose to do for
Mhm.
almost 2 decades. What were his ideals as a youth, as a young adult, and a man of early middle age, as you understand them?
Well, of course, I wasn't there. But one of the things that I became very aware of was how much he had been affected by his education in the very school system that then turned against him. He, like so many people, grew up in an atmosphere of patriotic songs, patriotic pageants, civic education, citizenship education, the Pledge of Allegiance. One of the illustrations in my book is his 8th grade graduation picture, where all these little kids are lined up, or some of them are quite big kids actually, lined up in front of this gigantic American flag. Many of them were the children of immigrants, and the school system was absolutely devoted to turning them into loyal, honorable, patriotic Americans. And like most kids, he thought, sure, why not? Here I am at James Madison High School, Robert Farragut Elementary School. Of course, this makes sense. Look where I am. Look where I'm going. This is so wonderful. I get to be in these, what were then brand new schools. They look like castles. They look like Oxford University. It's great. And he believed you should stand up. You should be civically engaged. You should put your name on petitions. You should write letters to elected officials. In hindsight, I have to say that this was a good idea, but not a safe idea.
What's the larger context? Why was this hunt for quote unquote communists now? Why was this taking place in this, early mid 50s period?
Well, there were a lot of reasons. Uh, the New York City superintendent of schools was very influenced by the currents of the day. He began his investigation and hunt for quote unquote subversive teachers shortly after Winston Churchill gave his big speech about how there's an iron curtain descending across Europe. People were afraid of communist aggression, communist takeover. It was fear that went back actually to 1919 and the first communist revolution. J. Edgar Hoover got his start pursuing subversives and socialists and communists and such. In 1920, before there was an FBI, there was a Bureau of investigation, I think it was called. And he was employed there, and that was his entire career. And he just never stopped. He believed there was a red menace and kept notes and kept files and kept names. And then after World War II, started sharing his material, which again truly enlarged the net of suspects. There were a lot of people, or at least an influential number of people, who truly hated the New Deal, hated social welfare programs, thought they were the leading edge of the end of civilization, or certainly of the free enterprise system. And I can't tell you how many things I read that had that all in caps. The free enterprise system that we have to preserve. And so they felt that the Communist Party was an international program of subversion that had secret agents all over the United States. I'll say this is possibly true, but I'm sure the people who are running these programs wished they were half as successful, a quarter as successful, a tenth of successful as the anti-communist investigators believed they were. So there were people who very strongly believed that communist cells were being trained to infiltrate water supplies and put fluoride in our water, because everybody knows that fluoridation is an agent of mind control, and people will lose their will to resist if you fluoridate the water. I mean, it's nonsense, but it was very popular nonsense. And of course, it's nonsense that's coming back again. So I can't dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah.
So there was that. I could go on, but ask me another question.
I mean, I remember, you quote in the book, like, if your child goes to a school that does not give your child's class rank to 3 decimal places, then this is probably a communist plot because it is destroying individual initiative and promoting communalism. Or if they're going to like a band, because a band is multiple people working together, that's probably like a syndicalist sort of stepping stone and stuff like that.
Yes, yes, sharing is very bad. And there were local officials who wanted to ban books like Robin Hood from elementary school libraries because they promoted, of course, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. Obvious communist
So
philosophy. Uh, and it goes, but the most egregious and hilarious thing I saw was how school orchestras were training for socialism, because not only did they promote this kind of communal activity, but they frequently loaned out instruments at no charge. Very, very bad.
okay.
This is not the way I was raised. So I was quite astonished to read a lot of this stuff.
Now, politics aside, another kind of stream, and we're going to go back to your dad and the teachers in specific, but I kind of think this context is important because even people your age were 4, 5, 6, 7, at the time of some of this. There was a big cultural media industry devoted to drumming up fear. And one thing motivating, as you document the right-wing media then as now, was that even if it wasn't widely popular, these were often niche publications in a sense, they were extremely profitable. And this also goes down to an individual level, that some of the people that were informing or reporting on the menace or saying I had been betrayed were making like hundreds of thousands of dollars, in the 50s, right? From their informing. So can you explain and give an example of what some of the informants gained, of kind of the profit motive that was behind some of this?
Right. So let us be generous and say that the audience was credulous. And the speakers were often motivated not only by whatever conviction they had, but by the desire for profit. And I'll add that one of the convictions they often had was really, really deep anti-Semitism, because there was a general eagerness, I'll say, to say that communists are Jewish and Jews are communist, and there's no separation between those two categories. And we all know that Jews are evil, and therefore communists are evil, and therefore I'm going to bludgeon this over and over and over again. And you can't believe how many ways I can say this every single week and charge you $2 in 1950 to read my newsletter. So there was the profit of writing these newsletters. There was the profit of publishing books. One of the better known late adopters of this was William F. Buckley, who made a whole career of being a conservative provocateur, but really began in this anti-communist moment and got his start there. There was also a lot of money to be made as a speaker, going around the country, giving paid addresses. There was a lot of money to be made doing public relations for other speakers. There's a fascinating character whose last name was Zoll, who formed all of these organizations, had names like American Purity Council for Education and Forthright Americanism Justice, and just meaningless patriotic noun upon noun kinds of things. Zoll had a very flourishing career going around urging school systems to weed out liberal leaders. He also had a very flourishing career supporting people like Father Coughlin, the radio priest before the Second World War, who was rapidly anti-communist, anti-Roosevelt, and most of all, anti-Semitic. One of the things Zoll did was he tried to blackmail a radio station by sending picket lines around the radio station saying, I will not call off my pickets until you put Father Coughlin back on the air. He actually was tried for extortion. He was a general PR flack for a lot of extremist radio personalities while running his own separate purity and education organization.
And this is, again, this can sound silly, but this is someone making in the ballpark of what would be $1 million a year today in some of these years, it seems, right?
It was quite well paid. Another thing you could do was be a paid informer. When
yeah, let's just kind of bottom line it for a second. What was the teacher's salary at the time for a year?
About $5,000 a year.
And what was the informant's salary?
Well, depended how successful you were, but you could easily make $30,000 a year.
30,000 a year in what year?
1952.
Right. Okay. So
good money. Very good money.
Very, very good money, right?
You could be paid by congressional committees. You could be paid by individual state committees. You could be paid by the New York City school system, yeah, which had a paid informer on its salary for a while in its anti-communist investigations. A man who was completely delusional in ways that, and opportunistic in ways that are easily documented, but they didn't document it. They paid him to report and provide them with names.
Meanwhile, and I'm just landing this so we have time, for the Q&A too. I've just got like maybe 3 more questions on this part. Meanwhile, there's an actual, vibrant, explicitly pro-fascist and pro-Nazi movement. And by subtlety, I mean like they're filling Madison Square Garden. This is not like a basement operation or a secret channel, right? And these are people that are explicitly in the school system, and that goes untouched. And this is part of like the backstory that you kind of trace. Before he's kind of attacked as a communist 10, 15 years earlier, he's coming to the school system saying, we've got a real problem. There are fascists, there are literal Nazis and fascists in this school system, like in a very explicit way. And they're trying to overthrow our government and, you know, beat our students and things like that. What is the response from the school system and the administration at that time?
Sit down, be quiet. If you keep this up, you're going to lose your job. There was, for my father, in his Gompers Vocational High School, a particular teacher who had risen from teaching shop class to becoming the assistant principal, who would do things like use, this is just before World War II, use government money that was created to keep the best students in school by paying them to have jobs so they wouldn't quit school and go off to work. He was using that money to send students of his own choosing to sell copies of Father Coughlin's newspaper at the local subway stop. He was permitting students to put up anti-Semitic, pro-fascist flyers all over the school. There were allegations that he was recruiting students to work in war industries and be subversive characters, although that is not proved. Also, he hated Blacks, he hated Italians, he hated Jews, and was quite vocal about this. When a group of teachers at the high school tried to report him to the Board of Education, they were basically slapped down, although he did eventually get censured through a more public trial. After the transit union got involved, that was a much more serious threat to the Board of Education than having a few teachers come and complain. But in the archives of this investigation of this teacher, who was quite a cause célèbre at the time, I also found a list that was in the records of this investigation of a fascist teacher. And the list was communist teachers at Gompers High School. And on this list, it had about a dozen names, including my father. And his crime was that he was active in the local union and was sponsored the school newspaper. It hadn't occurred to me that being a faculty sponsor for a student newspaper was a politically fraught activity. But like so much else about this story, my response was, what on earth is that about? So there was that. But before World War II, sorry, there was a very large and active pro-German movement in the United States for lots of reasons. That sort of went underground when we were at war against Germany. But after the war, a lot of the people who had been active in that reemerged and became not pro-German, but anti-communist. And the other thing I kind of have to mention is that in New York, at least, there was very strong antagonism between the teachers union and Jewish teachers in general and the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church in New York, at least in this period, was very aggressively anti-communist. And some people say, well, this is two global movements dedicated to top-down authority who are at war for the soul of the world. Yeah, but I think there were other things that were going on in New York and in this country as well. In Italy, the communists and the Catholics seem to coexist much better. In South America, you often get the communists and the Catholics coexisting. In New York, it was open warfare. And there were various very influential clerics in New York City, not just Father Coughlin coming out of Michigan, but cardinals in New York who were very intent on supporting the purge of the schools and getting liberal teachers out of the school system.
So your father, you have the transcript, and he takes a very inventive approach that kind of weaves in some of very approach you didn't see in any of the other transcripts. We're not going to tell people what it is. They can read the book to see kind of what happens and what he tries. That said, how many people, how many teachers lost their jobs in this process in New York City alone?
It's not absolutely clear because the records are so secret and so restricted. And many people were pressured into retiring or resigning, which got recorded in a whole different way. So it's hard to pull out exactly how many people, but it was at least 1,000.
Yeah. So 1,000, at least 1,000 teachers. Okay. In this particular, in just New York City.
Right. And this was going on in Denver and in Los Angeles, in other places too.
You document some of those parallel threads. So this is such a gripping story. You know, I could ask a million more questions even having read it, and I want to give others with us the chance to chime in. I know we've already got some questions in the chat, and if you want to kind of ask a question or add it to the chat, that would be great. Meanwhile, I do want to add again to the link again to get your own copy of the book. As I said, it's 200 pages. You can finish it in a weekend. Let me just kind of drop those in too. There's from Bookshop if you want to support your local bookseller, and there's from Jane's site. Okay. So yeah, please feel free to keep the questions coming, or if your chat's not your game and you want to try to raise your hand, I'll see what I can see. Um, so uh, Michelle asks, what was and Joan, we'll get you in a second. What was the backlash against this political program? Did the firing of popular teachers cause any uproar?
Not immediately. And that's what's so disheartening. One of the things that happened was that everything was very, very secret unless a teacher tried to go to court, in which case the investigators would release their names, at which point they started getting hate mail and terrible telephone calls, and generally being run through the ringer of the most vile public opinion. And there were many people, as there are today, many people who thrived in this kind of extremist echo chamber and felt very justified in their accusations and their personal attacks. The first teachers who were fired, including Irving Adler, who I mentioned before, sued. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 1954, I think it was, the court ruled that they had not been deprived of their civil liberties, but only of their employment, which didn't count. There were state laws saying if you belonged to an organization that had any communists in its membership, which was quite common and possible, you were tainted. The dissenting opinion said that this is tyranny, this is guilt by association, this is really unconstitutional, but it stood for 20 years. 20 years later, the teachers were reinstated and those laws were overturned.
Great.
So it takes a great deal of time for the wheel of justice. The arc of justice bends slowly.
We've got a couple hands up, and I know I've got several more questions here. So I'm gonna see if I can do the people that I'm gonna unmute you. So Joan, if you're able to,
Yeah.
yeah, what's your question?
Well, I didn't want to use the chat because I wanted to say hello to so many of the people I know on this call and also to congratulate Jane. Um, we have a lot of great historians on this call, actually. And I think, as a historian myself, I want to suggest that the motivation, as you've sort of indicated, the motivation to adopt this virulent anti-communist positions could vary depending on the circumstances of the group or the person. And you've talked about the financial motivation, Jeremy, um, and the Jane, you just used the word hatred, some personality trait that drives someone into this kind of hatred. But I, um, some of you guys, some of you know that
And Joan, just for
yeah,
what's your question?
what's my question? Yeah, I know, I won't go on, but my question is, because of the variability of I can't keep this that short, Jeremy. Trying. I want to know, Jane, if you developed any empathy at all for any of the parents who might have felt fearful. That is, anxiety and fear are underneath this. Did you,
There's a
in
great deal of
your family,
anxiety.
did you develop any empathy for the any of the accusers?
Thank you.
Well, it's funny because the accusers are not visible, and it's not at all clear that they are parents of children who are in school. And I think this is something that we can see today as well, that many of the most vigilant people who attack current educational policy don't actually have children in school, don't have children in the schools that they are policing. I have very little evidence, slim to none, of how parents were feeling about this. I think there was this general sense that, communism is bad. Uh, but most parents are busy. Most parents want their children to learn to read and write. Most parents would like it if they could tell the difference between the Mississippi River and the Volga. But this kind of agitating is often not from the individual parents. Do I have sympathy for those individual parents? Sure, being a parent is hard. Do I know what they were thinking? No, I really don't. But I think that, as you say, there were many motives and many emotions. And I think Jeremy mentioned the category of people I call the fear profiteers, but certainly there were many more people who were terrified in the same way that there are many people right now who are terrified of I don't know what, immigrant killers who are eating cats. These kinds of anxieties flit through the world and become very powerful, and people don't even know always that how much they're imbibing of this kind of stuff, and these kinds of anxious movements and anxious moments reinforce themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Great question. I'm going to do one more via audio, and I'm going to then ask a couple that are in the chat. Lori, I'm going to ask you to unmute if you're able to. There you go. Yeah, what's your question, Lori?
Pleasure to meet Jeremy's mom. I taught, I was in a teaching program in Idaho after I did my Vista service and had to do a social studies presentation, which I did on the HUAC hearings. And the reason I'm framing this, I want to give you a little background, but my question is going to be about your reaction, whether you knew similar situations. I was talking about Lillian Hellman and Dashiell Hammett and her book on scoundrel time. And I gave this presentation to all the other social studies, history teachers, talking about her point that people were not motivated by necessarily the carrot of getting some reward for turning people into HUAC or the stick of being punished if they didn't. She said she over and over and over encountered people who simply thought, oh, well, this is what we're doing now. Yesterday, I was a liberal who believed in civil rights, and today I'm turning people in because that's what we're doing. And the whole fashion trend aspect of the period fascinated me. And the class, the whole class said, great presentation, you had enthusiasm and knowledge and details and da 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 da. But why this topic? It's not important. It didn't matter then, and it's certainly never going to happen again. These were the future teachers of history in Idaho. So my question is, have you encountered this phenomenon among current teachers? Did you ever encounter that phenomenon outside of Lillian Hellman of it was a fad?
Well, I guess the short answer is no, because I wasn't surveying current teachers. But certainly when I began working, I felt like this is a horrible event that has been forgotten. And part of my impulse was to bring it back. And because I'm not the fastest worker in the world, by the time the book came out, it's completely relevant and it's happening all over again. So it's not surprise, you won't believe what was happening then. It's, oh my God, we're back here. I wouldn't call it a fashion. Certainly the Hollywood trials were, it was fashionable to, in Congress, it was certainly very fashionable to go off and attack movie stars or interrogate them or get them to turn upon each other. That was tubs of fun. I don't think in the schools it was fashionable in the same way, but it certainly was an element of groupthink. If you can call that a fashion, I think it was in the air, and in the same way that we're seeing today, so many outrageous things become normalized that you don't even know what you're doing.
Thank you. Great question again. And yeah, I remember the timeline of you writing the book, and it was a history, and then it was current events in Florida, and now it's today's news wherever you are in this country. So, um, got some great questions from Daniel. I'm just gonna kind of circle one of them. If so many teachers, because I know you cover this in the book and some really interesting, if so many teachers were fired, what were their employment options? Could blacklisted teachers find jobs in other industries?
They could find jobs in other industries. They had a great deal of trouble finding jobs as teachers, particularly public school teachers. Some of them became private school teachers at much lower salaries with none of the protections or benefits that their reviled unions had gotten for them in the public school systems. The New York City superintendent was quite aggressive in sending out information, names of teachers to other states so that they couldn't move to California and get hired there to prevent that kind of thing going on. Teachers had a terrible time. There's a fascinating study that was never published that's buried in a special collection at Princeton, where a sociologist did a lot of research on the economic consequences of the blacklists and surveyed teachers about what kinds of jobs they got and what their economic suffering was. And it's really dire reading. Possibly the grimmest part of it is a number of teachers said, I'm really eager to participate in your survey, but don't use my name, I'm afraid. So the fear of losing their current employment was quite real. On the other hand, a lot of teachers, like my own father, were college educated, they were smart people. They could find something else to do. And of course, the something else they could find to do was often much better paid than being a public school teacher.
You share that really poignant story in the book of, you know, one of the families you talked to, their father was blacklisted, excluded from teaching, found a job that paid much more, did it for many more years. And, you know, who was he? He said he was a teacher, you
And
know.
that was after their father died, his three sons, they were asked, well, what did your father do? And they all said he was a teacher. He hadn't been a teacher for 35 years.
Yeah.
But
So,
that was his identity. Another very poignant thing is one of the people I spoke to, is both his parents lost their teaching jobs, and they saved the letters that their students sent to them.
yeah.
And one of them, and again, this is in 1953, one of them has a 50-cent piece taped to the letter from a fourth grade kid, because obviously you just lost your job. You could use 50 cents.
And, you know, Dina's got a question there. And, you know, you kind of hinted, that's a whole rich story in the book. We probably won't get into it at this moment about the students mobilize and kind of was that to protect certain teachers or try to, and how was that kind of responded to? I wanted to make sure we hit Yola's question.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Am I frozen? Are you frozen?
I
There
don't
we
know.
are.
Sorry, I'm back.
I didn't quite understand the question there.
So let me just get to the question. Um, this will be a new question. Yola, I know you got your hand up. I'm going to read it from the thing if that's okay.
No, it's not.
It's not about the question.
Yeah.
I just have a comment
Sure, briefly. Yeah.
that I have the other legacy that my father was the lawyer for all these people, and for the teachers, for Lillian Hellman, for a lot of people accused of being communists, and those who were going to be deported were defended many times by my father and his associates pro bono. So there was never a financial piece in there. Although we did have eggs and a TV, it was all barter, but we didn't have any money. But it's an amazing legacy, and it's about deportation. And my father was also the treasurer of a group called the American Committee for the Protection of the Foreign Born. And because of that, the government in 1952 wanted to deport him, which I found out in my FOIA file. He was a naturalized citizen. So here we are again, exactly the same.
Thank you. Let's gather. You know, in the chat, if you could you share one thing you're taking away from this hour? Just kind of curious what's landing with people. Gotta thanks, fist bump. Thank you for sharing your stories, a legacy we should all know, remember, and prevent. Yeah. History repeats. Yeah. So don't worry. The 60s are just what, 7 years away? Yeah, we got a couple people sort of really talking about history repeating. Okay. This reminds me, I'm gonna grab, see if I, oh yeah, it's right here. hopefully the Zoom will let me show it. This is a medal, and it's from James Madison High School. And on the back, gosh, this is going to be pretty tricky to get the Zoom to show. But it says excellence in English, Saul Schur, 1927, right? So we're what, 98 years since getting this medal, and then the great English student becomes the English teacher, and the story builds from there. So I think another part of your book is all these twinned histories, right? You have the accordion file in the 2000s, you have your father's, whole second career that we won't, step on. They'll have to read the book to kind of do that, but it certainly goes in, it really has a rich irony with this getting kicked out of the schools. And yeah, and the opening line of the book, just to kind of close with an opening, is the year I entered kindergarten, my father got kicked out of school. So many more thanks and kind of takeaways are coming in. This is so inspiring. Here's that book link again. And Mom, I just wanted to give you the last word as people kind of take in what they've heard of the story so far.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming. And I hope you do read A Blacklist Education, just because I'd love to keep up the conversation. I learned so much myself while writing this book, and there's so much I'm sure that all of you can add. I think that irony and even comedy, Black comedy, is a big part of this story, as well as outrage. There are so many offensive things, I'll just say, that were going on, but also wonderful things. And for me, it was wonderful going back. I'll just share one story while you're wrapping up. One of the things I realized when I was 4 years old, growing up in Manhattan, my whole family went to see The King and I on Broadway. And I remember it vividly. It was wonderful. They all wore hoop skirts. It was terrific. Years and years later, it's one of the few things I managed to actually ask my father about. I said, why on earth did you do that? Why did you buy an orchestra seat to a Broadway show for a 4-year-old? And he said, oh, that's easy. My folks were in town and I was about to lose my job. We wanted to show that we were still solvent. Which obviously I hadn't thought about at all, and unfortunately got distracted and didn't follow up. But what I realized afterwards was The King and I, of course, is all about a very brave and very isolated teacher standing up to a tyrant. I said, how perfect this can possibly be. And there's that kind of thing that goes throughout this story and other stories like it.
It's a wonderful book. It's full of just really rich and important stories. And I'm just so grateful to all of you for joining us. Spread the word, those of you listening, watching this later on the recast. And yeah, Mom, just couldn't be prouder of you. Just really grateful for the gift of your love and life, but also, of course, this family history that you took so long to document. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Cheers all. To be continued. Bye-bye.